People say that we're currently caught up in a cultural trend of evil supermen. They look at The Boys and see Homelander, then they look at Invincible and see Omniman, and then they go to play video games and see Superman and his regime in Injustice. But I think calling it a cultural trend is a little overblown. Most of the trend can be chalked up to the adaptations of The Boys and Invincible coming out very close to one another and introducing normies to the concept of an evil Superman. The Boys adaptation started in 2019, and the Invincible adaptation started in 2021, but the Invincible comic started in 2003, and the Boys comic started in 2006, and the concept of an evil Superman goes back much, much further than either Homelander or Omniman. Let's wind back the clock and find out how old this cultural trend actually is and discover who was the first evil Superman. 1992 gave the world Supreme, and while the Supreme most people are familiar with is the later Alan Moore version, who was a heartwarming homage to the Silver Age Superman, the original Supreme by Rob Liefeld was quite the piece of work. He delighted in violence and prolonged the Second World War just so he could have the excuse to kill more people. He also had a god complex and believed that he was at first an Old Testament angel, and then the Old Testament God himself. While Supreme wasn't as overtly evil as Homelander and Omniman, he was certainly crazier than both of them combined. 1969 gave the world Hyperion, the first in a long line of Marvel takes on Superman. Hyperion presaged Blue Marvel, Sentry, Gladiator, Captain Marvel, etc., etc., and Hyperion himself started the lineage of Hyperions, some of which ended up being just as heroic and moral as Superman himself. But the original Hyperion was solidly villainous in his characterization. His original origin, given in Avengers 70, was that he was the last survivor of one of the many worlds of the Marvel microverse. His world, no larger than an atom, was destroyed by a particle collider experiment. Think of it like Horton Hears a Who meets Krypton, but he was saved by the Grandmaster, who put him on a team called the Squadron Sinister, which was staffed with other pastiches of DC characters. There was Dr. Spectrum for Green Lantern, Nighthawk for Batman, and the Whizzer for the Flash. Grandmaster, apparently, is a DC fan. Maybe the big blue elder of the universe was once a guardian of the universe who left Earth-1 for a more wild, younger, soap-operatic universe. That's my take, at least. Eventually, it would be revealed that the Grandmaster lied to Hyperion about his origins and that he was an artificial being created by the Grandmaster's power based on the Hyperion of Earth 712, the Earth of the Squadron Supreme, not the Squadron Sinister. As the name suggests, the Hyperion of Earth 712 was a hero, not a villain, and would actually fight with the original Hyperion in the pages of Mark Gruenwald's classic Squadron Supreme miniseries. 1964 gave the world Ultraman, Superman's Earth-3 counterpart, a member of the crime syndicate of America. Ultraman was rocketed to Earth from a krypton that never exploded, and unlike Superman, gained powers when exposed to kryptonite, though where his kryptonite came from in a universe where krypton never exploded is never explained. But it's worth noting that kryptonite, in the old comics, was depicted as stemming from the internal forces that blew Krypton apart, so it's likely that other planets out in the universe created kryptonite if they exploded under similar processes. Ultraman was very evil, and was completely fine with wiping out entire Earths for his self-gain, such as the time in the pages of Superman Family where he assisted the Lex Luthor of Earth-2 in attempting to destroy both Earth-1 and Earth-2 under the logic that it would clear the multiverse of pesky superheroes while leaving his world, Earth-3, intact. But Ultraman was, perhaps, not pure evil, and he died an oddly heroic death in Crisis on Infinite Earths, charging headlong into the antimatter wave, saying that he never ran from a fight in his life. Perhaps inspired by this scene, Grant Morrison would bring back Ultraman in the pages of his metafictional classic Animal Man as an unlikely hero who helped Animal Man defeat Overman, a Superman from a nightmarish world where superhumans were government experiments. Weird how that presaged both Ultimates and the boys, isn't it? And speaking of Bizarro, 1958 gave the world Bizarro, one of Superman's most persistent antagonists, and for good reason. He's very unique and interesting. I personally wouldn't call Bizarro an evil Superman. He's a dangerous Superman, a crazy Superman, and a weird Superman, to be sure, but I don't think of Bizarro as an evil Superman. He does what he feels is the right thing, even if it's the wrong and backwards thing. And when he's among his own kind in Bizarro world, he's not a threat to anyone. He's Superman by way of Frankenstein's monster. He's Superman with his strange, alien visitor aspects, exaggerated to grotesque, comical, and frightening degrees. Bizarro is a huge threat, but only when he's not on his home world, the reverse of Superman, who is a huge boon, but only when he's not on his home world. Bizarro isn't an evil Superman. He's a Bizarro Superman. And who can forget the way he went out in Alan Moore's Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow? Hello, Bizarro, hello. We come at last to who I feel is the first evil Superman. From the pages of Action Comics 199 from the year 1954 comes the Phantom Superman. The Phantom Superman was a weird clone of Superman created by Lex Luthor, and that's saying a lot since we just talked about Bizarro. The Phantom Superman was created by Lex Luthor's 3D materializer, a device which is sort of like what a person in the 1950s would imagine if you described a modern 3D printer. It records the image of an object and then duplicates the image down to the atomic level, except for the image's color. For some reason, it can't copy color. You can have your Superman clone in whatever color you like, so long as it's gray. Being an atomic duplicate of Superman sans coloration, the Phantom Superman has all his powers and abilities. Even his clothes are just as invincible as Superman's Kryptonian clothes. But the Phantom Superman has a unique weakness. Energy has to constantly be fed to him via an invisible beam, and he has to periodically return to his spawning chamber for a full recharge of atomic energy. He also, presumably, lacks Superman's super intellect, because otherwise he would have realized that crime doesn't pay, or at the very least he would have realized that taking orders from a guy like Lex Luthor, who has a worse track record against Superman than Goku, was a bad idea. Lex sends the Phantom Superman out on a crime spree, of course, and the possibility of the story turning into one of those the public turns on a framed hero stories is touched upon and dismissed in a single panel. The public has to decide whether or not the blue superhero is the same person as his black-colored, evil doppelganger. Where have I heard this plot before? Oh, I got it. You know, the jury is still out on whether or not DC civilians are smarter than Marvel civilians, but this story proves that DC civilians are certainly smarter than Sonic the Hedgehog civilians. Superman and the Phantom Superman clash inconclusively, as the Phantom Superman escapes by forcing Superman to stop and catch a tossed ocean liner. But in a feat of super thinking, Superman is able to deduce exactly what Lex Luthor has done and exactly how the Phantom Superman works. Personally, I would have guessed that the Phantom Superman was a Superman from another universe, but then again, I don't have Superman's super intellect, and the guy that keeps an army of robotic duplicates of himself at his North Pole fortress, like Santa Claus, meets Dr. Wily would be up on the fine mechanics of creating artificial life. And if you're still bothered by Superman cracking the mystery just by thinking about it, remember, they only have so many pages to tell a story in these comics. Superman then picks up the trail of the atomic beam, connecting the Phantom Superman to Lex's lab. His microscopic vision must be really good if he can see that. He follows the beam to Lex's lab, and Lex deploys the Phantom Superman in defense. The two Supermen engage in a very brief battle. You have to remember that fight scenes were not the point of these early Superman comics, and then disappear beneath the sea. But after a while, only a grey Superman emerges. Oh no, what's happened? Has the Phantom Superman won? And of course not. Superman doesn't lose in 1950s stories. He won't even get a black eye until he fights the parasite in Action Comics 361, and that's in 1968. Superman defeated the Phantom Superman by taking him far enough underwater for the atomic beam feeding him energy to cut off, and then disguised himself as the Phantom Superman simply to troll Lex Luthor. I wish the modern Superman was as cheeky as he used to be. Imagine Lex Luthor getting busted by a LexCorp janitor opening his shirt to reveal the S symbol. What became of the Phantom Superman after the story is unknown. Did Superman leave his body at the bottom of the ocean? Did he haul it back to the Fortress of Solitude and put it in his trophy room? I like to think that he reprogrammed the Phantom Superman and put him with his robot Supermen. But because the Phantom Superman needs to constantly recharge, he's usually kept in the Fortress of Solitude, polishing the glass of the bottle city of Kandor and feeding the alien zoo, and isn't deployed with the other robots. But because he's stronger than the average Superman robot, he can be deployed as Superman's ace in the hole when the situation warrants it. In an alternate timeline, the Phantom Superman probably died taking a kryptonite bullet for Superman, likely during the Bronze Age when comics were getting darker and more soap operatic. You know, it's a real shame Lex Luthor suffers from the compulsions and idiosyncrasies of a comic book mad scientist. I don't mean that it's a shame he never uses his talents for good. I mean it's a shame he never returns to a superweapon after it fails. Sure, the Phantom Superman failed, but Lex's 3D materializer has real potential. Why didn't he bring it back and use it to create an army of Phantom Supermen instead of just one? He could have created his own version of the Justice League of America. In fact, that's exactly what Dr. Destiny would do later on in Justice League of America 19. You see, before Dr. Destiny turned into Skeletor plus Freddy Krueger, he was a mad scientist like Lex Luthor, and one of his inventions created a clone army of the Justice League with all their powers, and then some. I wonder if he read Lex Luthor's old notes. It goes to show you that if you don't implement your crazy take-over-the-world plot, some other mad scientist will. And there you have it. The story of the Phantom Superman, the world's first evil Superman, great-grandfather to Omniman and Homelander. But is he really the first? Could we go back further than the Phantom Superman? Is there an evil Superman yet older than the Phantom Superman? There might be, if you're willing to stretch the definition of an evil Superman. It's fairly common knowledge nowadays that Clark Kent was not the first Superman created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. Superman was published in Action Comics, one in 1938. But back in 1933, Jerry and Joe were struggling to get their creative projects off the ground. The writer and artist team had sent their work out time and time again, but time and time again, they were rejected by publishers. They decided to try their hand at self-publishing and created their own science fiction magazine, Science Fiction, the advance guard of future civilization. Quite the title for a magazine, isn't it? It only lasted for 5 issues, but in the 3rd issue, Jerry and Joe created The Reign of the Superman, in which the Lex Luthor-looking chap pictured here, a vagrant named Bill Dunn, is granted telepathic powers by mad scientist Dr. Ernest Smalley. Bill quickly goes down the absolute power corrupts absolutely route and kills Dr. Smalley so that there would never be another Superman to challenge him. But Bill Dunn doesn't realize that his powers are temporary, and with no scientist to recharge him, he loses his powers and returns to being a miserable nobody in line for the soup kitchen. Should we consider Bill Dunn to be an evil Superman? I personally wouldn't, because then it invites us to ask if Superman's literary antecedents like John Carter and Tarzan count as good Supermen. The Phantom Superman remains my choice as the first evil Superman. Still, it's interesting to think that the modern trend of evil Supermen is anything but modern and may predate the idea of Superman himself. What's truly novel may not be the idea of an evil Superman, but the idea of a good Superman.